Welcome to a very special edition of Ask Dr. Julie Hanks podcast. In this episode, I will be the one asking questions, and I have an amazing guest who you will be really excited to hear from. His name is Kevin Franke, and you probably know who he is, but I just wanted to start out by giving Kevin a chance to introduce himself because the media has portrayed him in a certain way, and I want you to hear from Kevin, like how he introduces himself. So welcome, Kevin.
Yeah, that's quite an introduction. Thanks, Julie. So I'm Kevin Franke. A lot of people, most people would recognize me as the husband of Ruby Franke. I'm the former husband of Ruby Franke. We were divorced earlier this year. I'm a dad to 6 wonderful kids. I am an engineer, a geotechnical earthquake engineer, a former professor. I am a nerd in every sense of the word. I am a good neighbor. I love watching BYU football and love watching the Utah Jazz, and I'm just a normal guy.
Thank you. Thank you. So you have probably been contacted or attempted to contact you by local, national, international news media, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty wild over the last few years.
I can only imagine. How come you're willing to talk with me when you've only done, 2 other interviews, like the Hulu documentary and then one other podcast, right?
Yeah.
So how come you're willing to sit down with me?
Well, one, because I know you. You know, I think we go back a couple of years.
Yeah.
We've had some really good conversations. You've been a great source of help for me in the last couple of years, and it's been really validating to hear what you've shared with me and to really feel your love and sympathy, and so I appreciate that. I also know that you're not necessarily interested in the crazy narrative, the popular media narrative that's out there, but you're more interested in the truth and more interested in basically the humanity in the story of the tragedy and the rebirth really of my life and my family.
Yeah.
And that's what, I'm here to talk about today. So
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. We got acquainted. I think you reached out to me after I posted a video on Instagram and Facebook saying it was before the final judgment hearing. What would you call it for Ruby and Jodi? Their sentencing.
It was either their what would you call it?
I can't think of the word.
Where they entered their
Where
pleas.
they entered their plea, yeah.
Or then where they were sentenced.
And I said that Jodi should be held much more accountable because she was in a position of power. And as a therapist, I understand the power imbalance of a therapist-client relationship. And so I think I posted that, and then a friend showed that to you. Is that right? And then you contacted me.
A good friend of mine who was a big support of me through this entire experience, she shared that with me, and it definitely resonated. And I said, okay, I definitely need to have a conversation with Dr. Hanks. So she, I think, DM'd you.
She DM'd me and gave me your contact info.
Yeah,
I think that's how. And then we've been texting, and we've met a few times. Kevin actually let me see the whole Connections curriculum, because I was fascinated to see like what was going on underneath the surface in this Connections group. So yeah, it's fun that we've become friends. So I really appreciate you being here today. And I just I've been able to see you as a good, honest, intelligent human, and it's been really hard to see the media paint you as a villain or as a ignorant or some things like that. And I mean, I can't imagine how hard that's been for you. So if people, we're not going to talk a lot about what happened, right? I'm less interested in the story, but if people want to know kind of the whole backstory of the Ruby and Jodi abuse case, you did a Hulu documentary
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell people about that so they can get the
Yeah.
whole.
This is where, if someone asks me the question, how do I learn about what happened? I will always direct them to that or that 3-part documentary series. It's called Devil in the Family: The Fall of Ruby Franke. It's a documentary series that's streaming on Hulu. And the success of that series really blew me away. I had no idea that it would be as watched and as talked about and as impactful as it has been. The previous most watched documentary series on Hulu and in the entire existence of Hulu amassed something like 3.9 million views in the first week. Ours surpassed 7.9 million views in the first 5 days.
Oh my goodness.
And so, not only did we become the most watched documentary series on Hulu, but I mean, the impact that story has had and continues to have in the public discourse, in popular culture, popular media, even all the social media vultures who are out there who love to feed off of the story and exploit it themselves for their own, gain. It continues to generate a lot of attention. I mean, every day, there's still a story written somewhere in the media about it.
Wow. What do you think it is about the story that has people so fascinated that it would be the #1 documentary on Hulu?
I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think the sheer craziness of the story.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people hear the story and it's almost like, nah.
Like, you got to be kidding.
Yeah, no, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
Right? And then, the story itself is just so sheer horrific that I think, unfortunately, there's a large part of that audience that's just attracted to a train wreck. And they like seeing, the horrific stories. They get a hit or they take something from it. So I think that's attracted a large part of the audience. I also think, though, that there's a large part of people that see an element of themselves or somebody they know in the story and it resonates with them. And it's almost like they can't take their eyes away from it, even though they want to.
Yeah. I'm really curious, getting to know you. I know that you're a good, intelligent, smart person. What vulnerabilities did you bring into that marriage and then into like the situation with Jodi that opened you up to being vulnerable to that level of control and manipulation?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, one of the questions that I'm most frequently asked is like, how? I mean, you're a smart guy. Like, how?
Yeah.
And that's a question that I've had to tackle myself. And I've had a lot of time to really reflect on that and think about it. And I've come to learn that emotional intelligence is not the same as like knowledge intelligence or just what we generally call intellect, like, what you learn in school or learn from reading books.
Yeah.
You can read every book on the topic of emotional intelligence, but until you actually live it, until you actually go through the steps of growth and change, just knowing something does not necessarily equate wisdom. And so for me, it's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is just knowing a bunch of stuff. And I know a bunch of stuff, right? Yeah. I'm a PhD. I'm a civil engineer. Yeah. I've been a professor for 12 years, a very well-published, internationally recognized professor. I was like at the top of my career winning numerous teaching awards and things. I was always near the top of my department and my college in terms of like the teaching ratings. And if anyone from the outside would have looked at me and said, wow, like I want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
And I wanted people to look at me and say, ooh, I want to be that guy. That I needed that
like external
validation to feel like I was enough.
Yeah.
And because the reality was that I was so incredibly insecure throughout all of my life. And I've personally found that there's a correlation between the amount of like training and education that a person seeks and obtains in their life, and usually the level of personal insecurity that they have. In other words, they're trying to compensate for that insecurity by accomplishing more and more and more and more, climbing the ladder higher and higher, looking for one more rung to get above the rest of the crowd,
So that was your motivation in some part?
Oh, 1,000%.
Okay.
Like
so this insecurity was driving your professional accomplishment, your need to be the best, the most
seen, the most awarded,
the
most, celebrated. And certainly when my wife, started our YouTube channel and when she started attracting a lot of attention and we started getting a lot of praise and paychecks from that was just like pouring gasoline on already, a burning dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And so it was exactly that weakness, that insecurity that Jodi and Ruby both exploited.
Okay.
To cause me to do things that really were, contrary to my better judgment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in the moment seemed like absolutely the right thing to do.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you brought this insecurity into the situation and this need for external validation. And so when that external validation isn't there, you just kind of do things against who you are because you're needing the approval of Jodi and Ruby.
Yeah, well, somebody like me who has no like strong sense of inner strength or confidence is constantly looking for somebody to tell me what to do. And so I always have one or more people on a pedestal, right? Those are kind of what, using the language that I like to use, those are my gods, the people that are more than human to me. And so I listen to what they say, I follow what they do, follow what they teach, and I need them to tell me what to do because I have zero confidence in myself to make those decisions correctly.
I'm curious kind of your perspective on how LDS culture played into that or helped create that external need for validation.
Yeah, I don't think there's like any aspect of LDS doctrine that I clung to that was like, you are not smart enough or you're not capable or that's not what the doctrine says. But I think there's definitely a cultural element where we often will believe that I need somebody else to tell me the right thing to do because I'm not enough. I'm not righteous enough to be able to make this decision, or I'm not mature enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not wealthy enough. And and because of all these not enoughs, it's so common in our culture to look outside of ourselves for somebody else to fix us or to tell us what to do or how to live, or to go get some like procedure or something that's going to finally make us enough.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. That vulnerability that you brought in, that need for external validation. What warning signs did you miss regarding Jodi and your work with Jodi because of that vulnerability and that need for external validation? Like, what, looking back, can you see things like, oh, I missed that because I was seeking this other thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I could.
That's a whole interview in and of itself.
I could like publish, a volume set of all of the red flags that I've been able to look back on and see. And hindsight's always 20/20, right? But
of course.
Some of the biggest ones for me, like right from the start, I feel like I had her pegged.
Really?
Right in the very beginning. And yeah, I talk about this in the documentary, and my kids do too, where it was like when some trusted, close family friends introduced us to Jodi Hildebrandt with glowing and rave reviews, my first exposure to Jodi was some big workshop. That was the title of the workshop was Love and Lust, and trying to unravel the difference between them. And I remember going to this workshop, and I arrived late, and I walked in, and like there was an energy in that room that was palpable. It was an energy that was basically like, men are horrible. That was the energy that hit me. There were probably 2 or 3 women to every man who was in there. And the women were very animated, very excited, very into what was being said, what was being taught. And the men, for the most part, were very timid, very quiet, very subdued, except for the men that were up in front, who were they were the spokespeople. They were the people that she was modeling. And all the women were gushing and praising these men for what beautiful, strong, powerful men, righteous men these men were. And I don't want to give the impression that like I'm bitter or angry, because most of those men who are up there, we've gone through a lot, and we still emerge and continue. I'll call it a distant friendship.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of empathy and compassion for those men, because like me, they got there in their own journey, and it was all through their own insecurities as well. But I still remember walking into that room and thinking, this is a cult.
Really?
And the very first words that I told Ruby after that workshop, when she's like, what do you think? I said, I really don't want to tell you what I think, because you're not going to like it. No, I really want to know. And then another one of her friends came over, and she said, no, I want to know what you think. Tell us. I said, this feels like a cult. Wow. And they just laughed and laughed, and they thought it was so funny that I said that. And that was my initial instinct.
Wow.
And, the way that master manipulators and predatory gaslighters, predatory cult leaders work, if she just came right over and was like, you need to do this, this, and this, you are, a horrible man, I would have turned and walked away.
Yeah.
But that's not how it happened. She came over and was like, wow, what an outstanding man you are. You're just such a model man. And Jodi, right from the start, was so good at identifying my vulnerabilities. And she knew just how to like stroke my ego,
praise you,
and pump me up with praise and things that just got me, oh, I like this person. I had this person wrong. Like, this person is great. This person knows what she's talking about. And it wasn't long before, I found myself being one of those men up in front of everybody. It was one of those invitations that's just like, hey, you are such a man of God, a man of truth. You can help so many men. Can you get up there and just talk about like how, you've managed to have the marriage that you do, and how you're so responsible and honest and humble, and of course, like, straighten my tie, and
which is exactly what you were seeking, right?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was seeking. And looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was a tough one, that I didn't see it,
Yeah. Or you saw it and then you let other things override it, it sounds like.
Yeah, but another big part of that was what we were talking about earlier before we started this interview. Was there's I don't think this is unique to the LDS culture, but I think it's very prolific in the LDS culture. There's this in LDS culture, there's this popular and longstanding tradition or teaching that is that the men preside in the home. The men are supposed to be the priesthood leaders. They're supposed to lead with love and kindness and tenderness, and that's what is encouraged and taught all throughout our lives, from the time we're little children singing little primary songs up until we're adults, and so we have this belief, this idea that it's like, I really have to be, very sensitive and careful and respectful, and I don't want to challenge my spouse. And, on the flip side, we live in a time where there is such a strong cultural push for women to rise up and become strong and become loud and become independent. And so I think these two cultural trends, one from larger society, one from LDS society, they kind of clash. And what I think is happening, and in more homes than people would admit, is that there are very, very controlling wives, female spouses, who control from the shadows. They pull the strings. They know how to manipulate. They know how to control their husbands, and they do it very, very effectively. But it's sneaky, because they don't want to appear like the bossy, controlling woman. They want to appear like the very kind, the very gentle, the meek, wife who stands behind her husband. But the reality is the husband's shaking in his boots, because if he missteps in one way and embarrasses his wife, or then she's going to punish him in whatever way that, she's established in that dynamic. And that was definitely the dynamic in my home for decades.
Wow.
Didn't see it, but I've come to recognize it now that I it's happened in my life, and I see it for what it is, and it's everywhere. It is everywhere in our culture.
That's fascinating. And that kind of plays back to, like, if you're needing her validation for you to be okay, then you need to keep her happy. And if she's unhappy or isn't giving you that validation, you crumble.
Yeah, it really was a toxic brew from the beginning,
Really?
Yeah.
Early on.
Yeah, each of us was so insecure that we needed each other to pump the other one up. And so it became, right from the start, a very transactional relationship, where it's like, here, I'll do this for you, but you need to do this for me. And as long as we continue in that cycle, it works. but it's anything but tender. It's anything but loving, because it's all about me. You know, it's not about her.
Mm.
And so it's a perfect breeding ground for resentment. It's a perfect breeding ground for passive aggressiveness, silently punishing your spouse. And that kind of stuff was rampant in our marriage. And I'm not going to say it was all Ruby and not me, because
we've
I was
talked about your part,
participating
right?
in that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like if I wasn't getting, you know, my ego, you know, placated, if I wasn't getting my fears of not being enough placated, I blamed her.
Mm.
And, you know, and she was vice versa.
Right.
And so I think this will set the table for a character like Jodi Hildebrandt to come in and say, I see what's happening. And she called it exactly as it was. But then she said, I know the solution. And here's how I'm going to help save your marriage and save your family and save your children from the inevitable, you know, destruction that is coming if you don't do something about it.
So it sounds like you and Ruby transferred your need for validation and approval from each other onto Jodi to some extent.
Yeah, she became the you know, eventually she became the authority figure, the power figure, the one that if she was praising us, then, oh, you know, we're okay. But if she's like not happy with us or not responsive to us, then, oh no, like what do we need to do to change, to get her happy again? And right there is the cult. That's the signature of the cult, right? But if you talk to anybody who's been in a cult, they'll tell you the same thing. Like when you're in it, you don't recognize it for what it is. It's only after the fact that you go, oh my gosh, like that was both scary and wild how it got to that point.
So you're confident to say you were in a cult?
Oh,
and she's a cult leader.
100%. I absolutely can say I was in a cult.
Wow.
I know, big breath,
that's
right?
big. That's big. Part of the power that from my perspective, that Jodi had was that she combined some good mental health principles with religion and spiritual kinds of ideas too.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that it really appealed to LDS clients, that there was this spiritual or religious flavor to some of her teachings. What's your perspective on that?
Well, you know, my perspective on that is that Jodi almost exclusively targeted the LDS culture. I don't think she had any clients, at least that you know I was aware of, that was outside of the LDS faith and the LDS culture. She had created the perfect sales pitch for, you know, what she was offering, and it's exactly as you described. She really was like a knowledgeable and a talented therapist when she stayed in her lane. Yeah. Like you read her stuff.
Yeah.
Like you tell me.
And I've watched hundreds of her videos and listened to the podcast as well. And I was horrified by the lines that were crossed in the name of being a licensed therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, like the stuff she would teach, like 80% of it or 90% of it was like spot on, good stuff. And, you know, as a side note, that is part of what made it, at least initially, so hard when I recognized like I needed help. I was at rock bottom in this experience, to go back to a psychologist.
I bet.
And put myself back in that situation, and then have my psychologist start saying a lot of the things Jodi said.
You're like, wait, no.
I know. And so
I bet you were terrified.
It was. And, you know, fortunately I was open with him to say, hold on, like, help me unbraid this, because Jodi would say the exact same thing that you're saying right now.
Yeah.
So who, like,
why should I trust you?
Yeah, exactly. Help me understand.
Yeah.
You know? And so she would take, like, if you imagine braiding like a rope, 80% of your strands are good strands. 20% are crazy.
Yeah.
And so, but she does such a good job hiding them in there. So she has this combination of solid, like, mental health, psychological principles and research from, over decades, mixed with LDS doctrine and theory, mixed with, I would also say, like, popular LDS cultural beliefs that aren't necessarily doctrine. And we can talk more about those if you want, mixed with a whole bunch of just natural talent as a communicator and
charisma,
charismatic, and which I know if anybody's watched like a 30-second clip of Jodi, you're probably laughing at that, because she isn't a feminine, attractive woman by any means, but she's authoritative. And nobody went to her because she was attractive or feminine. They went to her because she was supposedly the best. She was the person that people went to when everything else failed. And she marketed herself as that. So the people who were there were basically from day one, like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Help me. I'm
Help
desperate.
me.
Yeah.
I will do anything you say. Those were the clients she catered to.
And then she could just get her claws in and...
Now, that wasn't me. Okay, I wasn't that guy. That was my wife.
You weren't desperate at that point.
No, my wife, though, but her entry point with Jodi was our children, right? Because, and we can talk more about this later, and this is part of the motivation for my working with legislators around the country to try to create new laws to protect children influencers. Children who are on social media. The fact of the matter is that social media, when children are influencers on social media, it's like a narcissism factory. And children really do become little narcissists, and nobody is immune to it. And so it really started to affect our children, and we could see it. We could see it in their behavior. Some worse than others, and Ruby could see it, and she was panicked because her greatest insecurity, her greatest fear was, I am not a good mother. And she wanted more than anything to have healthy, happy children. And that's the irony of this, right?
Right.
Because now if you think of Ruby Franke, you think the worst mother in the history of mothers. And that is all Jodi.
So you don't hold Ruby responsible?
Oh, I totally do.
Okay. So when you say all Jodi,
I totally
say
do.
More.
But, like, I don't believe for a minute that Ruby had the intention of, like, harming or hurting our children at any point.
Gotcha.
I think her intention, it's not, I think, I know, because I've read her writings, and I was married to her for over 20 years.
Yeah.
I know how much she wanted our children to thrive. But her fear drove the bus the majority of the time. And fear drives an individual to do things that aren't wise. And so Jodi exploited that fear and led her to believe things that got, increasingly crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier. Enter in now the apocalyptic element of this story, the supernatural element of this story. And all of a sudden, Ruby was like, oh my gosh, she was in Planet Extreme.
Like we're running out of time kind of feeling, like I've got to save my kids.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
And Jodi was like just stoking that fire.
Mm.
And so the two of them really were like, I know I've heard, at least initially when they were arrested, like this Thelma and Louise comparison.
Mm.
They were, but not in the way people think.
Right.
It was like each of them was mentally unstable in their own way. And they just complemented each other in such a, I'll say, a perfect way that they created this perfect storm, that the two of them together were a force.
Tell me what you think about my analysis. I think Ruby was looking to Jodi for credibility and to become something other than a momfluencer. Like I can be certified, I can become a coach through Jodi's methodology. So it gave her more credibility as like a professional. And Jodi was looking to Ruby to have access to millions of people. And that kind of fed her need to share her message and get more exposure for her methodology. And then it just kind of created this perfect, like you said, perfect storm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's a little deeper than that.
Okay.
I think Ruby had multiple motivations. I think one of them was, that. One, she wanted to be that mom that saved her children from the monster of greed, the monster of narcissism, the monster of fame and popularity. She wanted to be that mom. But the second one is really important. And this is the one that actually people see the most. She needed to be seen as that mom. Does that make sense? It's not enough that she was that mom.
She needed other people to
validate it, to see her and praise her as the woman who bucked the trend, who gave away millions of dollars or walked away from millions of dollars in fame to save her children, save her family. And she wanted all of that glory. She wanted all of that attention. And that's what Jodi was promising her. And Jodi, on the flip side, yes, she wanted access to like Ruby's audience of millions of people, but she also wanted access to her personality, her reputation, her charisma. Ruby was in her own way a very talented show person. She could make flipping pancakes entertaining. And so her ability to tell a story, her ability to portray, this virtuous family life was second to none. Like you don't become one of the most, famous family vlogs in the world just off of, challenges and following trends alone. Like you have to have some real talent there. And she did. So those two things fed off of each other. Oh, one other thing. I think Jodi also had this inherent need to prove her methods right.
So like your family could be the example, the evidence, the testimonial. Like I saved the Franke family.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what she wanted. And she wanted everyone to see it. So those two just fed off of each other. And they needed me out of the way because I was increasingly starting to pump the brakes on the crazy.
Tell me, like how? How did you try to pump the brakes? What were some ways?
Well, and I go into more detail in the documentary series, but and so I'd refer interested listeners to that. But in a nutshell, it was like the things that were important to me, like the fame, the money, all that stuff to inflate my ego. Like she was walking away from it. She was talking about, like Ruby was talking about signing over the 8 Passengers brand and business to Jodi at no cost. Like, here's our multi-million-dollar company.
That's huge.
We're going to give this to you.
Because you're going to save our family? Like, what was she getting from it?
Well, because by that point, and again, I don't want to make this all about Ruby, because I also was in the boat of like, Jodi is elect. Jodi is chosen by God to do something special. This is our way of contributing to that effort. But you know, I was
like
never
an offering, like a tithing offering,
kind of
thing?
like a test from God. Like, are you, you know, like Isaac,
sacrifice?
Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac. Are you willing to sacrifice this big brand and business for the good of humanity? Like, you know, that's how it was framed. I wasn't.
You're like, nope.
I was like, Ruby, you're crazy. Like, this is crazy. We have a very good family friend who at the time was our manager, and he was like just blowing the whistle at this point, just like whoa, red flags, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And Ruby fired him.
Oh, wow.
It was on the spot.
So then you were on your own trying to stop the train. And
I was just trying to but do it in a way that wasn't like going to get me punished. And it's important to share that, because as part of this, you know, by this point, Jodi had Ruby's ear, and so she was constantly like giving her instructions and feeding her information and building her suspicions around me. Like, oh, Kevin isn't what you think he is. Kevin's just like every other man, but he's so sneaky and manipulative that he hides it. So he's more dangerous than other men, you know? And so Ruby started to really get those suspicions. And that's what ultimately led to our first separation. And it, you know, so everyone knows about like the separation where I left the home and I was out in Jodi's care. And that was horrific. We can talk about that if you want, but that was hell. But prior to that, what most people don't know about was there was a separation before that was about 3 months in length, but it was what Jodi and Ruby called an in-home separation. And, you know, other previous clients from Jodi have talked about these kinds of things publicly. It's one of these things where the wife just lays down the laws of the house. It's like, you are allowed to come at this time, go at this time. You are allowed to eat your food in this space. You are allowed to sleep in this space. Everything else is off limits. And if you violate it, that shows me you don't care about me. You don't care about our relationship. You don't care about our marriage, and I will act accordingly.
So you lose all power.
Yep. So, you know, prior to all of this, like, we're going to give away the business and stuff, I had just been released or freed from this 3-month in-home separation. And that was hard. That was so hard.
Yeah,
it was honestly abusive. And
you just have to please her, like keep her happy, right? So she allows you to eat in the main room.
Yeah, or if, you know, it gets to the point where if she graces you with any interaction or even a kind one word in a text, you're like jumping through the roof with, you know, happiness. I mean, that's how starved for affection you become. And again, remember, let's base this again, what you know about me now, having all this insecurity, having all this low self-esteem. Now it's like, if I want any of that from the person who's the most important person in my life, my spouse, I have to earn it.
Wow.
And yeah.
That's so sad. That's so abusive. Like, you don't get to be a person. You
It
have to
is.
perform like a dog for a treat.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
And what is horrific, I've come to learn, is that there are former clients of Jodi who are still in that dynamic, where the men are still in that mode and their wives are lording over them and are, like a dog, making those men like appease them every moment of the day so they can get their attaboy or their treat.
From what I read and from the documentaries and stories that I've read, sexuality was a big component in this, like shaming men for their sexuality.
Yeah.
Was that part of the separation, was withdrawal of sexual contact? And
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how was sex woven into this?
Talk with any man how it would be to go 3 months without sex with your wife. Like, it's hard.
Was there also sexual shame that that she was kind of putting onto you?
Yeah, I
I
think what Jodi was really good at in this arena was taking doctrine and teachings from the LDS Church. So she had like quotes from church leaders over the decades. Especially, she loved quotes back from the 70s and 80s that were a lot more, I don't know how to say it, like, what would I call it? Controlling,
orthodox.
A lot more orthodox than they are today. Maybe I'd say, like, today it's more about the spirit of the law, but back then it was the letter of the law. Like, you can do this, you can do this, you can't do this, or so Jodi was very much about that. But I think the most damaging lie that she would teach, and she would only teach it to people that she had really got her hooks into. She wouldn't ever present this like in a first interaction. Yeah. Because she would know that people would just run away. Like they wouldn't listen to it, right? It was this idea that sexual attraction is lust by its nature. So if I'm walking down the street and I see a woman and I'm like, feel attraction to that woman, that's lust. I just lusted.
Which is bad.
And
sinful.
She would then use that scripture that's like, if you lust upon a woman, you've committed adultery with her in your heart, right? Mm-hmm. So she'd be like, you basically just had sex with that woman.
Instead of, you're human, you notice beauty, and that's totally normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it would get to that point where it's like, as a man, once you buy into that, try going out into the world and walking around and being just like, you end up like putting your blinders on and just looking at the ground, because you're just like, I don't want to look at anybody, because if I feel any sort of emotion or attraction, or I think, oh, that person's attractive, I just lusted.
And that's bad. And then I have to be punished.
And then Jodi was also a master of, how do I say it? She was a master of extremism. So she would say things, it wasn't just that, oh, you lust, it's you are an addict. Everything was you are an addict.
And was this just for men? Like women could have sexual thoughts?
No, she would do it to women too.
Okay. I just haven't heard about that teaching with women.
And I know it's not popular and it's not out there, but she had women groups. And she was just as abusive to the women in those groups as, she was to the men in the men's groups.
Wow.
But a lot of times what she would focus on with the women was, you're allowing yourself to be placed in this box. You're allowing this man to have power over you, to lord over you. You need to rise up. You need to take control, be independent. You need to take charge. So she was training women to become kind of these lords, right, over their spouses. But she would never frame it that way. But that's exactly what she was doing.
Wow.
And the men, she was constantly breaking down. And she alone wasn't doing that. Like, she would have her attack dogs in these men's groups. Men that were like so invested in getting her praise that when she would say, she would often, like in these Zoom meetings and stuff, she would text or DM them and say like, this man is lying. He's manipulating everybody. Confront him.
Go after him.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so like, it's just like little robots. You do. I did that.
Were there some people in the group that actually had compulsive sexual behavior, or were they all just regular?
No, absolutely there were.
People that were just having attraction?
No. There were definitely people in the group that had compulsive sexual behavior.
But she kind of lumped everybody together?
She lumped everybody together. And I think, that had virtues. Like, I think the people who were in the compulsive category, the ones who were actually like criminally, committing acts that were criminal, that it made them feel like, oh, I'm not so different than everybody else. Like and to them, it kind of lifted them up and helped them feel like, oh, I'm more normal. But to everybody else, it was this alarming feeling of like, oh my gosh, like things are worse than I thought.
Like, I'm like them.
I'm an addict.
So is that part of how she convinced you that you were dangerous to your family?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, that is how she convinced me, and other men too. I mean, I wasn't the only one that got banished to separation, right?
It seems like a pattern over a long period of time that she would do that with couples.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of it was to just break the man down.
Yeah.
Strip him of every sense of ego and power and make him very, very compliant to his wife's desires and wants and needs. And so it wasn't healthy at all for a relationship. The ironic thing, though, is that there were silver linings to it. Because, again, a lot of the things she was saying, like, were true. Like, the reason you're doing all this is because you're so insecure. The reason you're an addict is because you are so insecure. You need external validation for everything. And so you turn to sex. Even though I wasn't turning to sex. With the exception of, I did, like with my wife, enjoy to have sex and would, like, I think many men seek it out throughout the week. But, and certainly there were other men there who were like peeping Toms or who were like in multiple sexual relationships with and affairs and things like that. She would say it's all the same. You just pick your poison, how you act out to try to get that external hit or validation to like cure, you're trying to cure your insecurity. That's why you do it. And so in that sense, like my personal healing journey actually started in the midst of hell.
Say more about that.
Well, that separation where she was acting way outside of her bounds as a licensed professional. Now she's mixing in religion, mixing in her belief that God was talking with her and instructing her
and
how
moving
to
in with you, which is
that was before. But again, that was one of those things that was like. I mean, can we pause and maybe go to that?
No.
Okay.
That one, as a therapist, I'm like, you're not even supposed to be friends with your clients. You're not even supposed to go to lunch with your clients. Like, so that just is such a violation.
Yeah. So
anyway.
So you need to know the story to that. Because a lot of people, that's again, one of those holes in the story that people are like, how?
I think the Hulu documentary did a pretty good job.
Kind of.
Describing
but again,
that.
like they only had 3 50-minute episodes. So
It's hard to tell the
it's
whole
hard
story.
to tell the story to the depth that it deserves to be told. Here's the deal. At some point in, it was spring of 2021, we had just wrapped up with some like couples workshop in St. George, and all of us who were like her, chosen helpers were cleaning up, and we wanted to go to dinner together and celebrate. And so we did. Everyone was happy. Everyone's in a good mood. Everyone but Jodi. And a couple of the women sensed it, and they asked Jodi, what's going on? Like, are you okay? Is something wrong? And it was at that point that Jodi confided to these women that she was being haunted by hooded shadow figures at night. And she hadn't slept in who knows how long, she said. And she didn't know why or where they came from, why they were there. That's everything she was saying.
Yeah.
And these women were just like, it was interesting. Some of the women were like immediately just like, okay, well, hey, we need to go. It was like they were so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
They just immediately were like, nope, like this is my boundary of how I'm going to interact, but I'm not going to go further than this. But there were two individuals, and I could say her name because she was in the documentary. It was Paige Hannah and my ex-wife, Ruby Franke. Those two women just immediately went to Jodi and were like, okay, we can help you, And so that kicked off this really intense belief that Satan himself was attacking and targeting Jodi because she was chosen by God to bring this technique of this message of connections to the world that was going to heal couples and marriages and families throughout the world. And Satan was so determined to stop it that he was like sending demons to attack and torment Jodi.
Wow.
So
Okay.
like, again,
And they believed it.
Oh yeah, and we believed it too. Like us as the husbands, we believed it. And it was, again, one of those like stroke your ego kind of things, because it's like, you righteous men, you have the priesthood, so you can give her a blessing or cast out the evil spirits. We need you. We need your righteousness. We need your strength. So there it is. You hear it?
Yeah, yeah.
There's the inflate our egos, right?
Right.
And so of course we step up and we think, oh yeah, we got this. And that started this whole thing. Now, again, I'm not going to get into the details because I don't know the details. All I know is at some point in the spring of 2021, Jodi contacted the Hannahs and was desperate. The Hannahs say that she was suicidal, saying that she was going to jump off a highway bridge onto I-15 in front of a semi and end her life. And the Hannahs were like, as any good friend, like, no, let me help. You need to be taken care of. You can't be alone. We're going to come get you. And so they did. Drove down, met her, brought her back into their home in Utah County. And she was there with them for, I don't know how long, like 3 weeks, a month. She was in their home. And they eventually asked her to leave. Again, I don't know everything that happened there. I don't know the nature of things. There was a scene in the documentary that showed a possessed Jodi Hildebrandt. That video was taken while she was there at the Hannah's home. They were the ones who recorded that.
Wild.
Yeah. It was wild. So what you need to understand, here's Ruby's insecurities again. Ruby wants to be the favorite. She wants to be Jodi's chosen, number one. She doesn't want to be number two. She wants to be number one. Paige Hannah was the one nurturing Jodi, was the one that Jodi was confiding in, was the one that Jodi called, not Ruby, Paige.
So competition, kind of need
And
for...
it drove Ruby insane. She was so upset over that. And she really wanted in. And I did too, like, to be fair. I wanted to know, like, hey, what's going on? Like, and everything that was being told was like, oh, this is so sacred. It's so beautiful what's happening. Like, this is miraculous, nothing short of like godly. And when the time's right, we'll bring you into it. We'll tell you. But for now,
so you guys are on the outside, just probably dying. Like, let us into the secret. Let us be in the inner circle.
Yeah, like it's very human nature, right? To feel that way. Well, at one point then, Jodi calls Ruby, and Ruby was ecstatic. And Jodi was just beside herself, sobbing, bawling, and telling this story of how the Hannahs were holding her against her will, and she wanted to leave, but they were trying to indoctrinate her into another cult with another lady, and that she needed to escape, but she didn't know how, and she managed to escape, and she was so devastated and felt betrayed, and now she was turning to Ruby for help.
Can I interject? At the time, did any of you recognize that this is totally unethical, inappropriate behavior for a professional?
No.
That professionals never call their clients when they're in distress? Like that's an ethical boundary violation?
Yeah. Well, like at that time, no. Because at that time, like Jodi from day one was blurring her roles.
Was she a coach? Was she a therapist?
A friend or an elect woman of God. Like all those things were blended into one.
Okay, got it.
And so, no, we didn't realize any of that. And should that have been a red flag for us? Absolutely. We didn't.
Yeah.
You know, it was like a stop sign and we just blew right through it.
And so she ends up at your house.
Eventually.
Okay.
Not at first. So again, remember, this is like April, maybe May of 2021. And all through that summer, she's like communicating with us, and we get her in touch with her local bishop. And so Ruby and I and her bishop are communicating on the hour.
Because she's still suicidal?
And getting possessed and going into these trances and all this stuff. And she's down in her home in Ivans. We're up in Springville. We're trying to help how we can. The bishop's going over there nonstop. And again, like this is Jodi's manipulation. I have a fear of priesthood leaders, Bishop. I've been abused. I've been sexually molested by priesthood leaders in my past. And so, like, if you cross my boundary once, I will never trust you again. So what do you think her bishop did? Like, was so careful to honor her wishes and everything. So she was always like with the bishop, I want just you to come over and visit me. And so he was over there all the time. He'd be over there till 2, 3 in the morning, like blessing her, trying to cast out these, demons and exorcising these evil spirits out of her.
And no one thought like this woman needs to be hospitalized for a mental health crisis?
Well, absolutely.
Okay, but did someone say that? Did anyone say, like, let's get her to a hospital?
Yeah.
Okay. Way to go.
But here's what was said. Jodi said, this was one of Jodi's secrets, was that she had been institutionalized 2 other times in her life. And she said she'd been strapped down and been pumped full of drugs to subdue her. And she said the demons that tormented her in that state was more than she could bear. She begged, she pleaded, she cried, please do not take me back there. I can't face that again.
Wow.
You can help me. You are strong enough. You can do this. And so again, like her bishop and Ruby both were like, this is our job. We can do this. We can step up. But we wanted to elevate it with church leadership and authority.
Yeah.
And she just flat out refused. Like, no, no, no. Eventually, at some point in July or August, her bishop was like, I'm done. Like, I can't keep doing this. Hey, I have an idea. I think she should come up to your house where she can stay full time and you're there so you can just give her a blessing when she needs it. And
so he's trying to unload her on you.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. I was opposed to it at first. I was like, absolutely not. Like, and I knew, like, she was counseling our children
at the same time.
Yeah. And
as a therapist.
As their therapist. And she was working with Ruby, and I was attending her men's groups. So I considered that she was working with all of us. And now she's going to move in. Like, how's that going to work? And so I objected. But it was, again, one of those, how could you, Kevin? Like, this woman needs this. This is your time to stand up. This is your time to shine.
Well, and then Ruby gets to be the special one because she's now going to come and live with her.
Yeah. And at this point, the Hannahs were like, done. Like, she's dangerous. She's wacko. We don't want anything to do with it. And to their credit, like, they tried to warn us.
They did.
And we pushed them away. Like, no, like, we believe Jodi's story of like they kidnapped her and held her against her will. And so, again, the truth, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I have a hard time seeing them kidnapping her, knowing them, so I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah.
But at the time, yeah, we believe Jodi over everybody else. So yeah, she moved in August of 2021, and she was there between August of 2021 till January of 2022.
That long?
Yep.
Like months.
Yep.
And at what point were you asked to leave?
Leave the house or go into the in-house separation?
Well, both.
The in-house separation was from middle of October until the first week until about New Year's. So that time, about the week before she left to go back to Ivan's, where she felt like she was cured. The permanent separation came about 6 months later, in July of 2022.
And that at that point is when you didn't see your kids for a year.
Yep.
Okay. A lot of people have a hard time understanding how that came about. And I think you've shared a lot that would make that make sense. Is there anything else you want to say about
it was just this constant drip of you're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem.
And you're dangerous.
Yeah, your greed, your lust, your insecurities, your ego, all of those things are the root of the problem in your family.
It's you. So let's remove you and your family will do better.
Yeah. But it wasn't.
And you really believe that?
It wasn't so much like framed to me as like, we need you to leave because you're like bad. It was like, you need to go over here and work on yourself and heal yourself and then come back to us a healed and a truthful and a
better
like
man.
A man of truth, and like, so it became like almost like a mission, like
I'm going to heal and I'm going to be better for my family.
It was like, go over here and Jodi will work with you individually, and then you'll get healed and tight and strong and powerful, and then reunite with your wife and change the world. Like,
so it was this kind of vision of what could happen down the road.
Yeah, that's the carrot that she always dangled out in front of me.
Got it.
Like a lot of people, and even I have like, shared how she's berated me over that year and beat me down and broke me again and broke me again publicly. And so a lot of people would ask like, well, why didn't you just leave? Well, a few reasons. Because she didn't just break you down. Like anybody would just leave in that. But a powerful manipulator knows that hope is a better means of control than just despair. And so she would always put this carrot out that's like, you are such a strong man. I've seen it. I've had a vision. I know the kind of man you are. And you're going to become that man. But you need to step up. You need to like get tighter. You need to try harder. Like, you see the difference?
Yeah.
So she would break you, but then she'd put this carrot on a stick out there.
If you do this, then this will happen and you can have your family and you can be the kind of man that I've envisioned.
Yeah.
Got it.
So I was always like, okay, maybe next week, maybe next month I can go back home. But like week after week after week, Jodi would keep herself distant from me, and she would, every indication she would give me is, you haven't budged. You haven't moved an inch. If anything, you've gone backwards. You are nowhere near ready to go back home. That was really discouraging. After doing everything I knew how, after complying in every way I possibly could, I mean, the extents to which I like tried to change my life and be perfect were devastating. I mean, it destroyed me in every sense of the word.
Well, you were completely isolated from what I recall. You had minimal social interaction.
And that was a requirement. It's like everyone, Kevin, is going to tell you this is crazy. Everyone's going to tell you, what are you doing? You got to leave. You got to get out of it. Those are all people that Satan is controlling. He's got them.
So she predicted people's responses in a way that would make you trust her more.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Including the police, right?
Right.
So a lot of people who've seen the documentary have seen the interview I had with police, and when everything when everything came to a head.
That was very clear that you had no idea what was going on. When I saw that, I'm like, he had no idea. He's not a part of this. All I knew was
I was there to get my kids. I didn't know why. I didn't know what was going on. But my wife, who I hadn't spoken to for months and months, called me and said, you got to go pick up the kids. They're at this police station. Show me that you're ready to step up and be the man that I need you to be. Right. And so, okay, like, of course, I'm going to drive down there and get my kids. I'm thinking they're just sitting there like in the waiting room at the police station.
Yeah. I
had no expectation they were going to take me into a side room. I mean, I thought it was weird when they brought me back there and they had a cop sitting there in full body armor just sitting next to me.
And you're like,
and I was like,
happening?
You don't need to stay here. And he's like, well, actually, sir, I do. You want some water? I'll get you some water. But I'm like, why are you here? And then the detectives come in and sit down and you see, you've seen that. But the whole thing in my head that was playing out was everything that Jodi had told me for months and months and months leading up to that the police were corrupt, that they were the wolves trying to tear my family apart.
So don't trust authority other than me.
Yep.
So you're thinking they're being manipulative, they're evil.
They are under Satan's control, and they want to tear my family apart. Jodi's words were, they are the wolves trying to tear you apart. Don't let them. And so that's what's in my head the whole time. It was like, I'm in the wolves' den to rescue my kids. I got to get them out of here. I got to just get home and
they're telling you,
take care of my kids.
Jodi and Ruby are the wolves. And you're like, I remember your face was like, does not compute. Like, what
Yeah.
are you talking about?
Yeah, I didn't even register that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that's what a wolf would say, right?
Right. It's not us.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so that whole process was, that was the moment that the crack began in that foundation. And then more cracks. And over the space of a week, the whole thing just collapsed. My whole universe collapsed.
Every belief you had, probably
Mm-hmm.
every assumption, every relationship.
Yeah, every relationship, my professional career, reputation. Like I'd been fired by BYU because I refused to sit down for a Temple Recommend interview. And BYU requires it. And I was like, Jodi's telling me I'm not worthy. And if I go in there and get a Temple Recommend, then I'm lying to God. And I'm going to lose my marriage. I'm going to lose my family. And I'm going to lose my soul. So no, I'm not going to. And she would say, BYU is not going to fire you. You're a tenured professor. You're one of the top professors they have. But you know what? If they fired you, it would be the best thing for you. I would be thrilled if they fired you. So like, I got that in my head, like, oh man, like I need to lose my job in order to go back to my family. So I refused. I'm like, I'm not going to be
because
a hypocrite.
You didn't think you were worthy?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you asked me why, I couldn't pinpoint it.
Because Jodi said.
Yeah. It was like, well, I'm selfish. Because that's the whole theme of my separation was I'm selfish. And people be like, what does that mean? I'm selfish.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? I'm selfish.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't explain it because Jodi hadn't explained it to me.
Yeah.
So I'm just parroting what she says, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to sit down with my bishop and go through those interview questions because, I could answer yes to all those questions, but I was like, it's flawed because there's not a question in there that says, are you selfish? Because I would definitely say yes. Therefore, I'm not worthy to go into the temple.
So ultimately, you're not worthy to go to the temple.
Yeah. So BYU fired me. So I lost like my academic career that I had worked and sacrificed so much for. I lost everything. My kids were taken from me, by the state. And I was, in every sense of the word, a mess. I was a wreck.
Just broken down.
Yeah. Over that year, I had lost 45 pounds. So I was just a skinny little skeleton. And, everything, like I didn't know what to believe anymore.
Right.
And then my phone was ringing every 3 minutes by some unknown number, some reporter from somewhere across the world. Like, how did they even get my cell number? I don't know, but they did.
Yeah.
And so I was just being harassed everywhere. Fortunately, nobody knew where I lived in separation, or they would have been pounding down my door,
So that was your ground zero.
Yep.
What has life been like? So it's been 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
What has life been like for you in those 2 years?
A journey. I mean, I don't want to sound trite, but there's this metaphor of burning to ashes and then being reborn from the ashes, right? And that is really apt for me in my experience. Was everything in my life that mattered, everything that I had put into place to give me that external validation that I'm a great guy, I'm, people admire me, people want, everything had been taken from me. My reputation, both professionally and just publicly. Yeah. My children, and Ruby and Jodi had done such a number with all of my kids. Like they were all brainwashed and messed up, and everyone was turned against everyone else. Everyone was blaming everyone else. My marriage, my family, my faith, like my religious beliefs were now all scrambled because of Jodi. And you know, she had used scripture and quotes from church leaders, from like general conferences and things to control me.
Yeah.
And so that's really confusing, you know?
Yeah.
My health, my relationship with my own family, like my siblings and my parents, because I'd pushed them all away at Jodi's direction. And all my friends, like I
lost
literally
everything.
I was at as rock bottom as you can be. Not to mention now the tens of thousands of dollars of legal fees now, like to hire an attorney and to go through like the juvenile court to like get my, you know, start the process of getting my kids back. And so like all the money we'd saved and built up over the years of YouTubing and stuff, I was just watching it burn like right in front of my eyes, you know? And so I went back to our house, and the house was just, I hadn't been there in over a year, and it was absolutely in shambles. If Ruby hadn't done it, then the police who had been like ransacking our house did.
Yeah.
And earlier that year, this was 2023, earlier that spring, we had the biggest, you know, snow runoff that we've had in history. Maybe you remember that. But we live right next to a creek, and it had completely flooded our yard and took out like 5 feet of our yard. So I'd go back into my backyard, which was like my sanctuary, my haven, and it was all just a mess.
So you lost your yard, your house, your family, your friends, your relationship, your reputation, your career, your faith.
Yeah.
What have you been doing to reconstruct your life? Like, what's helped you?
And this is the hard part, because I'd love to be able to stand up here, sit here and say like, look at me, like, you know, admire me. Look what I've done. Like, but I can't, because I have no freaking clue how I got to where I'm at. It was a matter of day by day, just each day, get through the day.
Yeah.
And I could not have done it without the help of real friends. See, this is the part where you can always tell the real friends from the fake friends. Okay. Like all those years of YouTubing, had all of these friends, we'd go on vacations together. Those people were gone.
Yeah.
And when I reached out to most of them, not all, but most of them, they ghosted me because I was toxic now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it became apparent to me, like, okay, so it was never really about a relationship, a real friendship. We were just using each other.
So who was there for you?
Neighbors, my family, and the state. Interestingly, that's a really interesting and cool story. There was a point where, you know, right at the first, I was like, I'm fighting like a dragon for my kids. You know, the state took my kids. They're my kids. I didn't do anything wrong. That's where I was at that point.
Right.
And I was like, I want my kids back. And then I just remember, like, it had been like 4 nights in a row I hadn't slept. And my phone was ringing all night long. Like, I mean, like reporters were calling at all hours through the night. And so, you know, I turn on like do not disturb and stuff, but you're still just like, I know they're calling.
Yeah.
Even though I can't hear my phone ring, like I know they're calling, and still trying to like do the math. I describe it like you come to believe that like 2 + 2 = 7. And you just believe it. 2 + 2 = 7. But now all of a sudden you're like, no, 2 + 2 = 4. But how is that right? Like, I thought it was 7. And trying to just do the math.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would make the equation work was that Jodi and Ruby had done something really, really, really heinous.
Yeah.
But that just devastated me. Then I didn't want to go there because it was so painful. And it was in that moment and in that state where I had this realization, and honestly, I've come to see it as God. This is the point where I really started to know God, the real God, not the God that I'd been like taught my whole life is like this kind of strict being that's out of reach. Who, yes, he loves you, but you need to please him. Like, I came to know the real God because in that brokenness is when he showed up.
Beautiful.
And it was in that state that I had a really strong impression and feeling that the way to fight for my family and my kids was to surrender and let go.
Wow.
And that was scary as hell.
Yeah, your kids are in state custody. I mean, that would be really terrifying.
And I didn't know what that would look like. I just didn't know. But I remember calling my attorney and I was just like, changing plans. Like, I don't want to fight the state. Like, I want to work with the state and let them take the lead in this. And my attorney was like, are you sure? Like, really? And I said, his name's Randy. I said, Randy, I got to be honest with you and myself. Like, I'm broken. Like, I am not in a place at this moment to take my kids back.
Yeah. I remember one of our conversations, you told me that you didn't even feel like you could adequately care for them. And I thought that was really
I couldn't
brave
even take
and honest.
care of myself.
Yeah.
I was at the point where now depression was kicking in. I couldn't sleep at night, but I was completely dysfunctional. But then I would sleep for 16 hours.
Yeah.
And then I'd wake up and I'd be so tired still. And like, like just to eat was a chore. Just to bathe was a chore.
So it's a good thing you didn't have the kids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't have been able to care for them.
Yeah. And this is where, like, this was the point I was trying to make earlier, was that those caseworkers, those social workers from the state were literally like angels. And I mean, we've developed a beautiful friendship because I really came to see that not only did they care about like my children, but they cared about me and they cared about our family and they wanted what was best for us.
Wow.
And so they stepped up and man, they helped. I'm not going to say that like I loved them from the start. Like there were so many times that I wanted to just like throw this box at them or something. Like, I would be so frustrated and mad and disappointed with the pace that things were going and things like that. But they are more experienced and wise than I am. And so they were a huge support to not only my kids, but to me.
Wow.
And then neighbors, some of these neighbors, were in the documentary. They were so supportive, and my local church leaders, so supportive and loving. And it was amazing how my community, my neighborhood, and my ward just circled the wagons around me. And even though like the world was just barraging me with
pouncing on you,
I didn't feel that. because I was sheltered by their love and their care.
So relationships, I mean, it's interesting. Relationships are what got you to that place, right? Manipulative, controlling, unhealthy relationships. And also relationships are what helped you climb out of it and what helped you heal.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's a key difference in those relationships.
Yeah.
Like
Destruction versus
yeah. So the former, the ones that got me in that relationship or that mess, were the relationships that were more like dynamics. They were abusive. They were controlling. They were transactional. And, you know, if we get to the point where we boil down, like, what are the takeaways from this conversation to anyone who's listening? You know, one of my key takeaways would be to anyone who's listening and just feels like things are weird or feels dissatisfied in their relationships. The key thing to look for that I've discovered is that was true for me was those transactions. Like all that transactionalism, just, you know, I did this, this, and this for you, therefore you owe me this, this, and this. Like that mentality is so toxic and it's a red flag. And I was there and we needed real help. And I didn't realize it. I thought the transactions were good. I thought the transactions are what worked. It's almost like love languages, right? Like, what love language can I speak that will get you to give me what I want? And vice versa. And we're just going to transact with each other. If that like is poking someone who's listening to this today, seek help before crazy happens.
Yeah. So trust yourself when you feel like something's not right or something's off. Or there's not the mutual love and respect, and it's just more of a transaction is a great word.
Yep. If you don't feel that genuine tenderness, that desire to do something for the person you love for no other reason than you love them and want them to be happy, seek help.
Yeah. You've been really vocal about two issues that we've talked about before, just in personal correspondence. But one of them is regulation of the life coaching industry. You want to talk about kind of what you've been working on in that area?
And this is good because I know one of the hats that you wear is of life coach. And as you know, like I've pinged you lots of times to get your take on things because I appreciate and respect the stance that you've taken as a life coach and the Great Wall of China that you've built
totally
between
separate.
like your professional license career and your life coach career.
Correct.
And so that's the first thing I want to make clear. Like, I know there are 10 jillion life coaches out there. I am not saying you don't deserve to exist. Like life coaches can play a very important role in our society. I really think they can. The problem is when life coaches cross that line into the realms that can really affect people's lives and relationships, and they have no certification, they have no formal training or education,
licensure,
they have no oversight, so no one to be accountable to if they cross that line. So I don't know if you're okay with this, but sharing like how you reported Jodi.
Yeah.
So Julie, you reported Jodi to Utah Department of Professional Licensing, DOPL.
Yeah, I did.
And you told me about it. You reported them, I think it was like March or April of 2023.
Yep.
Where if DOPL had actually moved on that, My kids were taken down to Jodi's house in middle May of 2023.
I know. It's so frustrating. And had I known that Ruby was a client, then I would have had more to report. I was just reporting based on the unethical advice they were both giving regarding mental health and relationships. And I had documented time codes on videos and sent them, like, this is unethical behavior for a licensed therapist to be saying these things.
Yeah. And so do you remember what Doppel said to you?
They said it's freedom of speech. And unless she's doing something with a client that's unethical, there's nothing we can do. I didn't know Ruby was a client, or I would have reported that. I mean, when the story broke that end of the summer, what they had done to your children, I was horrified to learn that you were clients. I mean, that would have been so reportable, and they would have acted on that.
Yeah, well, and that's the basis of my current ongoing lawsuit, civil lawsuits against her right now.
Yeah.
Is that we were clients, and she acted unethically, committed
all
malpractice.
Across the board.
Yeah.
All across the board.
But what, Doppel didn't realize was that while she's out publicly making those statements, she's promoting and marketing that stuff to her clients.
Right. It is damaging her clients.
Yeah.
I just didn't have proof of that at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? Is basically what Doppel was saying is, well, she's acting as a life coach, and we don't regulate or oversee life coaches. So that's freedom of speech. But if she's doing it in a session with a client, then we can intercede and act. And now it's this like game where a lot of professionals, and there are a lot of them, where they like have these two hats, and they're like one hat, other hat, both hats. No, they're playing this game. But we as clients, we don't know the difference between a life coach or a licensed professional. Like, to us, everything she did was like had her credentials, LCSW, I think it was.
I think she was a licensed clinical mental health counselor, so CMHC.
Well, I think they changed that, didn't they? More recently,
it used to be LPC, and then it was CMHC.
LPC, yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's
it
the
was
old
LPC.
version. Yeah.
So everything had her credentials on it.
Yeah.
All of her books, everything. It was like Jodi Hildebrandt, MS, LPC.
Yeah.
So you bought those books going like, oh, like this is a professional counselor giving me professional advice.
Yeah.
And so it adds credibility.
Right.
And she was constantly throwing that in all of her speeches and everything. She would constantly drop that she was her field of psychology, that she was a psychologist. And
which she said that on camera to the police, which is actually,
I know,
that's unethical because she's not a licensed psychologist. You can't say you're a psychologist.
I know.
I was like, what is she saying?
That one statement right there just basically guaranteed like my malpractice lawsuit against her.
Yeah. So what are you working to change? What would you like to see happen regarding life coaching?
I want to see life coaches either regulated or the wall between life coaches and professionals regulated. But the point is that there has to be a means by which people who are affected by life coaches, hurt or damaged by life coaches, can hold them accountable.
Yeah, there's no accountability,
there is no accountability.
Which is one of the biggest problems that licensed therapists have with coaches, is there's no accountability.
Right, they're like ghosts.
Yeah.
And even Doppel has said, like, one of our biggest challenges is when we discipline a mental health professional and they go, well, that's fine. They just classify themselves as a life coach and just keep doing what they were doing before. Right.
Yes. And there is such a huge distinction between those roles that when I'm doing coaching and I think that the person needs mental health therapy, I don't do the therapy. I refer them to a therapist because I'm in the role of a coach. Even though I could do it, I don't because that's not the role I'm in. Mm-hmm. And I have two separate businesses. I do coaching out of one business, therapy out of another. It's totally separate, and
you
I
have
do
different contracts that
different contracts,
your
different
clients
agreements.
sign, so there's different disclosure, so they know
Different
exactly
website.
what they're going to get.
Yep.
Like, that's the right way to do it. Most life coaches, they don't do that.
But they don't even know sometimes when they're entering into
No,
mental
they
health
don't.
therapy because they don't know what it is.
They don't. They
Yeah.
are so quick and happy to enter the realm of like couples counseling and addiction counseling. One of the things like that I see so often, and it just eats me alive, is there's this constant ad or advertisement on Facebook. Facebook, like the algorithm knows I'm a man in my 40s, right? So it feeds me stuff that it thinks would be appealing to me. And there's this constant ad of this guy who gets up there and is just like, I am a expert in dealing with pornography addiction, and sign up for my course and you can finally break this horrible thing that's destroying your life. Like I didn't know that there was like specializations in pornography addiction.
Well, it's not even a diagnosis
I
in the
know.
DSM. It's not a thing.
But people don't know that, right?
Right. And coaches
so,
get to say whatever they want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this guy's out there peddling snake oil. And you got these people who, because of the conditioning they get, because of their faith and the culture, it's like they're desperate.
Yeah.
And they go to this guy, and he's just cleaning house, making money.
Charging hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars.
Right.
Yeah. So you would like to see life coaching regulated, or some kind of bigger separation between the
we had a
professions.
start. We had a start in this last year. In 2024, I kicked off the effort with a state senator, and it got passed along to another state senator. And initially, like the initial draft of the bill really had teeth, and it was going to make a difference. And it was really interesting because the professional mental health community, they got behind that so quick. They were so supportive and said, this is great, this is wonderful. But I underestimated the power and the influence of the life coach lobby. And they got in and wreaked havoc.
Really?
Yep. And that bill was not going to pass. Because they got in and started talking with all the representatives and senators around the state and saying how it was like it was infringing on their rights and all that stuff. And,
Wow.
So what got passed was a much boiled down version of it, which was essentially, it defined areas that could only be practiced by licensed mental health professionals. And anyone who practices in those areas is liable for lawsuit, liable to be sued. And so it's better than nothing, but there needs to be more. There needs to be more. Like, these individuals who are life coaches need to come out of the shadows. They need to be known. They need to be seen. I personally feel like they need to be regulated. By whom? I don't know. Honestly, I feel like they should be regulated by something like the Department of Commerce. Because
as a business.
Because really what they're selling is a product. Right? And the Department of Commerce, it oversees the selling of all sorts of products. So if they're selling a faulty product, they should be held accountable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to make it clear that there are amazing life coaches out there who do ethical work, who stay in their lane, who are really helpful for people, and they recognize the limitations of their role. And there are lots of good ones out there.
Yeah, and these individuals are the ones that are like, yep, sign me up. I'm not afraid. Like every other profession is registered. Let's go ahead and let's validate our profession.
Right.
Let's legitimize it. Put me on a registry of life coaches, and that way maybe it'll bring more business to me. Maybe I can now grow my reputation just like any other professional. But It's the ones that are like afraid of that.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that
Watch out.
watch out for.
Yeah. You've also been really vocal about protecting child content creators.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the work that you're doing in that arena.
Yeah, so it's not lost on me that the root, or maybe I should say the straw that started the break of the camel's back, was family content creation on social media. And I saw firsthand what that world did to my children, to me, to my wife, to my family. Yeah. Did we get a lot of money? Absolutely. Did we have some cool opportunities? Absolutely. Did we make some friends? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of other stuff that came with it that people don't like to talk about because it's uncomfortable, but it was there.
Well, it seems very similar to child stars, the laws that protect child actors.
Yeah.
Right? They can only be on set so many hours. They have to do school. They have to. Yeah.
And they're not, like, their parents aren't allowed to manage them. So in a child star, so we're talking about now like Coogan laws. So, you know, these laws have developed after decades of experience in Hollywood, where child stars, let's face it, child stars were exploited from the start. But now these laws were slowly put into place as these children became adults and they filed lawsuits and won. Now these laws have been put into place over the decades where children, for example, children's actors are entitled to trust funds or trusts that are out of reach of their parents. So it's only they can access them when, you know, the time is appropriate or right.
Yeah.
They're entitled to separate representation from agent that's not their parents. They're entitled to educational opportunities. And so they're, you know, whoever's hiring them to film a movie is required to give them so many hours of education a day. They're entitled to like benefits and healthcare and medical people and like psychologists on set. They're entitled to all of these protections that are there for their well-being and good. None of that is in place for influencers on social media.
Because it's so new. It's so, I mean, there haven't been decades and decades of problems that needed to be solved.
Right.
But you saw firsthand the havoc that can be.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about this, you know, I wasn't part of this, but there's a very good documentary on Netflix that's still out there. It's called Bad Influence, The Dark Side of Child Influencers. That shows firsthand what happens or can happen when a parent uses their child to profit and get rich and get famous. And the thing that like was a hard pill for me to swallow, but I swallowed it, was admitting to myself, to my children, and eventually to the world that 8 Passengers, our family vlog, only existed because of our children. If it wasn't for our children, no one would have cared.
Right.
And therefore, my children were exploited. Wow. And we use them for content to get clicks, get views, get likes, and ultimately get money. Yeah. Now, did we pay them? Yes. And I know most influencers today, like parent influencers or momagers is what we often call them, you know, mom managers, momagers, they pay their kids. Like child influencers are among the highest paid kids in the world. And everyone makes it about money. But there's so much more than just the money. Right. The mental health is atrocious among child influencers. And these kids are being trained and taught by the world that the universe revolves around them, that they are the most important person in the world, because to their parents, they're the golden goose, right? Without them, their parents aren't making 6 figures or 7 figures or 8 figures a year.
Yeah.
And so they get that message. And I promise you that those individuals are going to struggle and do struggle developing healthy relationships in their lives. And you, of all people, will know that the secret to happiness in life is fostering deep and meaningful and healthy relationships.
Amen.
So those kids, even though they're rolling in money, are being set up to be the most miserable people in the world. Why do you think so many child stars commit suicide?
Or drug
Get into
overdose
drug
or
overdose or addiction?
Yeah.
Because money does not bring them fulfillment and happiness.
And notoriety doesn't either.
No,
You don't
it's
know
a
who you
curse.
can trust.
It's a curse. You can't go out in public and just be anonymous anymore. And this is one of the things that I'm telling lawmakers around the country. They're like, well, isn't it just about the money? I'm like, no. Well-being. So I have started using a phrase that others have picked up, and it's called the right to anonymity. And so a child should have the right to be able to walk into a Walmart and be anonymous. Nobody know them. Nobody recognize them.
Yeah.
But if a parent takes that away, that is a huge loss. And there's no amount of money that can compensate for that.
Yeah.
There just isn't. And so in Utah, we went through a huge effort with Representative Doug Owens. He's a great guy. I mean, that guy is man, when he gets behind something, he pursues it till it wins. Yeah. And so he was the right representative to champion this bill. And the content creation community, all of my supposed friends, they were adamantly opposed to this. They lobbied, they got together, and they hired attorneys to lobby Congress here in the state to try to shoot down this bill.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were like, well, hold on. I thought you said that you're putting your kids' needs, your kids' health, your kids' well-being at the top priority. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
One of the things we wanted in the bill was when a child turned 18 to have the right to say anything that has my face, my name, my image, my likeness in it, I want removed from social media. And to give them the right to go straight to the platform and demand, with the algorithms that social media platforms have today, to nuke everything that had their name, image, or likeness in it.
Wow.
And social media fought that like a dragon. They brought in their huge, high-powered attorneys to lobby little Utah Congress people. And then the social media community here, the content creation community, gathered together and they hired attorneys to fight against that. They did not want their children to have the right to take down content that featured them when they turn 18 years old.
Wow.
So if you really stand up to what you say, that your top priority is your child's well-being, why wouldn't you honor that?
Yeah.
Honor that request.
What happened with that bill?
Well, we were able to negotiate and reach agreement on a lot of the key points. A lot of the things that I argued for got taken out. A lot of the things I argued for were left in, but they had loopholes put in so that if a creator hired an attorney and that could navigate those loopholes, they could essentially avoid being impacted by this bill.
Do you feel like it was like a success in spite of the changes?
It was a success in that it was a first step.
Okay.
But so much more needs to be done.
Yeah.
Essentially, It is a bill that requires parents to set up a trust fund for their children who appear in their social media monetized content and that appear in at least 30% of the content.
Okay.
And they have to then share at least 15% of the earnings with that child who appears in at least 30% of the content. And that's essentially what the bill is. There's more to it, but that's the big point of the bill.
Yeah.
Now, that's great, and everyone's cheering and saying, hooray, victory, we're done. And as I said, you got to understand, most of these kids were making like easily 6 figures a year, some of them 7 figures a year already before this bill was in place.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's not about the money. And this is what I want people to understand. My kids were very well compensated financially for everything they did on 8 Passengers, and they were still negatively impacted. What people don't appreciate and understand that I share when I talk with lawmakers is after all that my kids went through, the trauma, the horror, the abuse, the torture, everything they went through, the thing that continues to haunt them and that they continue to struggle with today in their mental health and with their therapists and things is not everything that happened with Jodi and Ruby. It's coming back to the real world. Here we are, like 5 years after we stopped vlogging. It's being a normal kid again. That is the hardest thing for them.
Just being a regular kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not about the money.
Yeah.
And all these creators that are out there, like, I love you, God bless you. So many of you are my dear friends, but you are in denial over how serious your kids are being affected by this.
Yeah. I love your passion about this. I mean, you've seen firsthand and experienced it firsthand what it can do to kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, keep in touch with me about these efforts, and I'll do what I can because I'm on board.
I mean, so we're talking now to representatives in multiple states that are looking to put in bills similar to what's been put in place in Utah, California, Illinois, New York, and so it's going to spread. But more needs to be done. These kids need to be protected.
Yeah, I love that.
And if I may, this wouldn't be a problem if you, the viewer, weren't constantly feeding off of this type of content.
Yeah.
If there was no demand for people to like get into the private lives of these kids, social media wouldn't promote it and push this type of content.
Yeah. Everybody has a part.
So stop watching it. Stop supporting it. Stop commenting it, subscribing to it, liking it. Stop following creators that put their kids all over social media. Teach them the type of content they should put out there with who you choose to follow, who you choose to like, who you choose to watch.
That's powerful. Kevin, thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
I want to end with this question. If you could go back to your younger self, pre-8 Passengers, pre-Jodi Hildebrandt, what would you say to him?
If you could have, like, if you could go back in a time machine 15 years and approach, little Kevin, 32-year-old Kevin, and say, hey, Kevin, in the next 15 years, you're going to get a PhD, you're going to become a professor at BYU, you're going to accomplish a lot as a professor, you're going to become a YouTuber, a famous YouTuber, you're going to have one of the largest vlogs on the internet, you're going to get involved with a psycho cultist, you're going to join a cult, you're going to be yanked and separated from your family, Your kids are going to be taken from you. You're going to lose your career, your reputation, your marriage. You're going to lose your private and public reputation. You are going to be divorced. You're going to remarry. You're going to find true love and happiness with somebody else. If you would have told me all of that stuff, I don't think I could have handled it. But I've learned that for me, the path to my greatest joys and happinesses were only through treading and doing the hard work to trudge through the deepest and darkest valleys of my life. There was no way, there was no going around, over, or underneath. I had to go through it. And I found myself by going through it. And so I would probably tell that me 15 years ago, I'd probably just smile, pat him on the back and say, love you. Knowing like what he was going to go through.
Yeah.
Because I know that guy always wanted to do good and the right thing. He was confused how to do that. And life was going to teach him the hard way.
That's powerful. I said that was the last question, but I just have one more. How are your kids?
My kids are great. We're thriving. We're all back together as a family.
Good.
Some kids are married. I now have stepchildren.
And you're remarried.
I'm remarried. Individually, collectively, we are thriving in a new life that we get to create. We get to write our story.
Yeah.
And that is so empowering.
It's wonderful. And it's such good news to hear that everybody's doing well and that you're happy. And I just can't imagine what this journey's been like for you. But I appreciate you sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to, step back in to some of these difficult things, but important things. Yeah. I think there's so many lessons to be told in this experience. I've made the decision that I want to write a memoir and share, go much deeper into these experiences and the things that I've learned. And I'm not doing it to be seen. I'm not doing it, for those old reasons. I'm doing it because it's part of my healing.
Yeah. Well, I will be the first to pre-order it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you again for being here today.
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.